Berlin, 15th January, 1944. Frost webs the office window while the wall map stares back with 1,000 pinned wounds. Oberleutnant Erika Weiss warms her fingers on a chipped mug, then breaks the wax on a courier pouch from Lisbon by way of Stockholm. Loose pages slither out, port tallies from Khorramshahr, an oil-stained manifest stamped ABADAN, Murmansk convoy summaries with margins torn by weather. She lines them like vehicles on a parade ground and begins to listen for the cadence numbers make. The first figure is innocent. Crates of US 6 frames noted in a neutral broker's ledger. Another sheet repeats the type, now with spares, tires bundled 10 to a rope, spark plugs boxed by the 1,000, gasket kits counted like seed. She checks the Persian corridor mileposts against shipping days and scribbles conversions from short tons to metric in a side column. Somewhere outside, a horse team clops past a government garage. The sound lands like an accusation. Weiss has no patience for Allied boasting, yet separate sources agree too neatly. A British clipping brags of wheels for victory. A Soviet radio voice praises Studer trucks chewing through snow. Her pencil slows on a number that keeps appearing first as a projection, then as a running total stitched across months. Vehicles delivered abroad, approaching 400,000. Not tanks, not bombers, trucks, the dull miracle. She does not write impossible. She writes plausible once, then underlines it. The colonel will want miracles. She will bring arithmetic. German lorry output can be counted by the month. This American current arrives as if by tide. She closes the pouch, straightens the pages, and hears the faintest phantom of engines from very far away, like smoke. South Bend, Indiana, March 1944. Night work makes its own weather. The plant breathes heat and steel dust. Belts whine, rivet guns cough, and fluorescent light turns perspiration into frost-white halos. Nora Kinsey thumbs a caliper until the jaws kiss true, taps a torquey wrench to feel its click, then signs her name to a line of Studebaker US 6 engines that smell of cutting oil and promise. A pallet of fasteners arrives with tolerances wandering. Production does not pause. Nora shims a gauge block with cigarette paper, resets the go, no-go, and threads the line back to spec. The foreman mouths thank you without sound. The whistle has been swallowed by the machines. On the loading floor, knockdown kits become geometry. Frames nested into crates, beds stacked like cards, axles lashed, tool rolls cinched. Spares go deep because doctrine says breakdowns are a nuisance, not a campaign. Tires arrive by the acre, inner tubes like coiled serpents, bearings sealed in paper to keep out the desert grit. She chalks a serial on a crate, 217,143, then writes it again in her pocketbook, a small superstition against the size of things. Somewhere down the line, a stencil reads ABADAN. Farther on, a clerk stamps Persian corridor in a violet that bleeds through pine. Nora knows maps the way mechanics know music, by the next turn. This truck will go to the railhead, the river, the ship's hold, the desert, the assembly yard, and then a road she cannot picture except as a thin line moving east. When the shift ends, the air tastes of metal and soap. She pockets the stub of her pencil. Outside, snow squeaks under boots and the smokestacks draw a black line across the sky, the factory's signature on the world. Normandy, 25th August, 1944. Canvas flaps snap like flags in a wind that smells of rain and gasoline. Private First Class Eddie Tex Carter climbs into a GMC CCKW 2.5-ton, hooded headlights narrowed to cat's eyes, convoy number chalked on the bumper. The MP at the junction drops his gauntlet and the river starts to move, low gear, double clutch, 100 trucks rocking as one. Speed is mercy, the sergeant told them. Schedules are doctrine. He learns the feel of second gear on a grade with a full gasoline load, the hiss of air when a brake line bleeds, the quick prayer before a blind crest. Red circles nailed to trees mark the red ball route. Halts are measured in minutes, not comfort. Somewhere along a hedgerow lane lies a wrecked Opel Blitz, its skinny tires splayed, toolkit a handful of ghosts. Eddie pulls past and thinks about the spare's chest under his seat. Hose clamps, fan belts, a grease gun that could save a day. By November, this artery will have moved more than 400,000 tons. An impossible figure if you have only ever counted by wagon. The same season, American factories will have shipped cumulatively roughly 400,000 vehicles overseas to allies, a total that would surpass Germany's entire wartime production of military trucks and lorries. In 1944, German replacements could cover only about half their vehicle losses. Eddie does not know those numbers tonight. He knows the weight of a full jerry can in his hands and the way the engine sings when the load is right. Rain comes. The column stretches, bunches, breathes. Eddie eases the wheel against the crown of the road and hands a chocolate bar to a boy on a bicycle. The boy grins, and the convoy climbs into the dark. Berlin, late August 1944. The harness room smells of damp leather, a ghost of older wars drifting up the stairwell to the analysis section. Erica Weiss rubs graphite from her fingertips and lays out ledgers that don't know how to lie, quartermaster returns, veterinary requisitions, depot counts of shoes and oats. The columns say what pride will not, that German infantry divisions still haul their war on thousands of horses, while the enemy moves on gear ratios and gasoline. She pencils a simple comparison that feels indecent. The daily lift of a single American truck company versus the creaking marvel of hay-fed muscle. One is tire noise and a grease gun. The other is a blacksmith's anvil and time. She phones a railway man who talks in the code of shortages. He admits carefully that wagons have replaced trucks on routes the bombers made uncertain. A Luftwaffe logistics officer jokes that gasoline has joined the resistance. Weiss does not laugh. She flips to the naval desk's notes on Murmansk arrivals and Persian offloads and sees the same type repeated, US 6, US 6, US 6. The redundancy is the point. Outside, hooves clatter past the ministry gate. Inside, she calculates how many fan belts and brake linings the Americans ship, as if they were pennies. The waste, she realizes, is deliberate. It turns breakdowns into short delays instead of battalion problems. She underlines a sentence. Allied logistics treat machines as consumables. On the wall, the Eastern Front bristles with arrows that never quite meet. She writes the word tempo in the margin and circles it twice. What happens to an army when distance stops being a weapon? She closes the file and feels the answer waiting in the corridor, like weather. Autumn 1944. Heat stands on the docks like a living thing. Crane cables sing as they take the strain. The slings bite oak and Studebaker frames sway over a forest of shoulders and stamped paperwork. A British officer smears dust from his clipboard, while a Persian stevedore taps a crate that still smells of Indiana snow. Chalk scrawls across paneling. US 6 here, axles there, beds stacked like cards. In the customs shed, a Soviet sergeant signs his name in a learned flourish and writes a single word beside it. Studer. Knockdown kits are the trick. What could not fit assembled comes in as geometry. Bolts counted by the 100, bearings wrapped to keep out grit, wiring looms coiled like tame snakes. In the rail yard, tank cars sweat. Flatbeds rattle toward the passes. Each wagon a promise of movement somewhere winter will try and fail to stop. Fitters in sun-bleached caps work by rote, frame, axle, bed, loom, test. A hand on a throttle, a hand on a prayer. When records thin, one can still trace the rhythm. Convoys into the Gulf, trains up the spine of Iran, depots blooming far inland like industrial oases. A mechanic would have cursed in 3 languages, then reached for the right wrench because the kit roll told him it existed. The parts bins look like extravagance until the first breakdown occurs miles from a railhead and is solved in minutes. That is the doctrine stitched into every crate. Minutes. A newly assembled truck coughs, then catches, idle smoothing as heat shimmers above its hood. The driver touches the dash the way men pat a horse before a climb. He does not know a woman in South Bend wrote the serial inside his door. He only knows the road just got shorter. Berlin, October 1944. The conference room smells of overboiled coffee and damp wool. Weiss pins a single sheet to the board and speaks without embroidery. Separate streams converge. North Atlantic convoys. Persian offloads. Assembly returns from inland depots. By conservative reconciliation, Allied shipments of vehicles overseas have climbed toward 400,000. Not rumors, but entries that persist across ports and months. Of those, she notes, the Studebaker US-6 appears in Soviet accounting at a scale that would be admired in peacetime and feared in war. Post-war reviews would place the figure near 152,000 to the USSR alone. She does not sell fear. She sells arithmetic. Spare parts inventories, tires, tubes, gasket sets, brake linings are provisioned so deeply that, aggregated, they would rival or surpass a month of German truck output. In 1944, our own vehicle replacements cover only about half of losses. The colonel's jaw works. He wants an air raid to fix what numbers have broken. We are attacking rail, he reminds her. So are they, she answers, with trucks. She sketches a line around a blown bridge and draws a dotted arc where a motor column would go. They are exporting tempo the way we export orders. He asks if deception can explain the totals. She shows him mismatched sources that still agree. A neutral broker's ledger, a Soviet radio boast, a British port tally. If this is theater, it is one that ships on time. Silence settles like ash. She finishes cleanly. Distance, once our ally, no longer delays their advances. Breakdowns are priced as inconvenience. Mobility has been democratized and boxed. What do we do? He asks at last. Lose slower, she says, and gathers the pins from the map like spent cases from a floor. Belarusia, October 1944. Frost climbs the tarp like lace, and the air has that battery acid bite of real winter. Lieutenant Galina Sokolova steps from the cab of a Studebaker US-6 and feels the deck flex. The wood planks varnished by oil and months of hurry. Her driver, Mitya, murmurs that the truck likes the cold, a barracks joke that would have started in a depot a continent away. They work wordlessly. Jacks down to settle the bed, rails checked, firing table clipped to the clipboard that lives in her coat. The launchers are BM-13S, 13 tube racks lashed to American steel, with sight posts that hold their breath just long enough to change a town's map. A runner returns from the infantry with a scribbled target. The road behind them is rutted sand, now turned to iron. She knows none of the serial number's story, only that the kit roll is complete. Wrenches, spare plugs, a grease gun that makes small problems disappear before they can become doctrine. Winterization kits, typically issued with alcohol, antifreeze, and heated battery blankets, mean the engines wake when ordered. Ground clearance and a forgiving clutch do the rest. She marks declination by star because the rails here are still hammered flat. Rails that would once have decided whether a battery could move at all. At H hour, the first salvo tears open the horizon in a scream that tastes like metal. Stab, ripple, lift. The deck shivers. In the after silence, she hears the truck cooling, a tick-tick that sounds like patience. Jacks up, cables stowed. The convoy fades back into birch and smoke. Somewhere in another language, a woman's chalk mark inside a doorframe keeps its promise. The road ahead is mud, then ice, then Berlin. The truck does not care. France, Belgium, September-November 1944. The MP's gauntlet slices the damp air and the column obeys as if the hand were attached to a gearbox. Eddie Carter's CCKW hums at convoy speed, hooded lights glowing like underwater fish. Ahead, a culvert has collapsed. Engineers fan out with perforated steel planking, those miraculous PSP sheets that turn bad ground into a temporary bridge. The halt window is 5, maybe 7 minutes, long enough to cinch a chain, not long enough to tell a story. Eddie bleeds his brakes, checks tire pressure by habit, and watches a smashed crate get shoved off the verge. It feels like sin. It is policy. Minutes, not lumber. On the floorboard sits the spares chest that keeps the doctrine honest. Hose clamps, belts, a coil of copper line that will become a brake fix in the rain, a grease gun that erases a squeal before it grows teeth. The truck's transfer case answers his right hand with the patience of an old sergeant, low range for the climb, high when the grade relents. Behind him canvas coughs, straps sing, and somewhere a driver mutters a prayer timed to gear changes. The Red Ball Express turns French roads into one-way arteries and soldiers into rolling pump muscles. In those 3 sharp months, it will move well over 400,000 tons, an impossible river if you count only by wagons and wish. Salvage teams collect what the schedule forced the convoy to shed. Nothing is truly wasted in a system this large, only delayed. Eddie hands his thermos to a kid from Detroit whose eyes are more red than white, and they share a boiled coffee grin. MP's arm drops, clutch in, clutch out. The river runs again, louder than weather, and just as indifferent. Ardennes, December 1944, January 1945. Snow arrives like ground glass, needling the skin, and the road becomes a rumor under the tires. Eddie kneels in slush to fit chains, half-moon hooks, frozen links that bite the tread, while artillery thumps somewhere he refuses to place on a map. The schedule doesn't blink. Drivers work in pairs to keep fingers. Ordnance crews trade jokes mean enough to be kind, and MPs materialize from fog to reroute convoys around bridges that no longer have names. When the CCKW hauls itself forward again, the chains slap fenders in a song that sounds like defiance. Patton's pivot demands fuel like a lung demands air. Rerouted red ball loops feed the advance with tonnage that would have seemed fantasy weeks earlier. Maintenance intervals compress because doctrine bends under weather and does not break. Winch lines sing, differentials complain, and someone tapes over a windshield crack with the patience of a man who has done this every night of his life. They bury a driver at a crossroads where the road signs all point to forward, the chaplain's words fogging into the same ether as their breath. In these weeks, the measure of American reach becomes a statistic that reframes the war. By the close of 1944, the enemy can replace only about half the vehicles it loses, while the United States has already shipped roughly 400,000 vehicles overseas, more than Germany would build in the entire war. That is what a driver feels without knowing, the weight of a nation in the right gear. Eddie eases out the clutch and listens for the familiar engine note that means the convoy will live another mile. Dawn is a rumor too, but rumors, like trucks, can be made real by enough hands. East Prussia and Berlin, January to May 1945. Ice loosens its grip on the roads with a noise like tearing cloth. Galina Sokolova's Studer noses through thaw, the hubs wearing a coronet of slush, the exhaust drawing white lines in the gray air. When the column reaches a stream that used to be a bridge, the drivers idle in turn, feeling the bottom with the front axle, then with faith. Low range does the rest. Rails lag behind like old promises, but the trucks do not wait for iron to be mended. Winterization kits earn their keep. Alcohol in the radiators, blankets on the batteries, grease thick enough to remember every mile. She notes in her log that tire wear is acceptable, fuel burn as expected. The battery will fire today and move again tonight. In Berlin, Erika Weiss types with fingers that have learned the weight of numbers better than the weight of a pistol. Fuel allocations arrive in fractions. Requisitions return stamped unavailable. Rumors say vehicles are being pushed into canals for lack of petrol. She watches a clerk copy her phrasing, mobility democratized and boxed, and feels the sentence detach from her and belong to history. Replacement figures have collapsed. Even the colonel no longer asks for miracles that require gasoline. Between keystrokes, artillery walks the city. Each shell shakes dust from the ceiling like an hourglass turned again. Weiss files her final memo and sets the pencils in a neat row, a private armistice. Galina's trucks, somewhere beyond the last intact bridge, idle while a runner points and a captain nods. The battery racks lower, rails glint, and the world becomes a whistle and a roar. Weiss closes her drawer on arithmetic. Galina closes her fist around a firing lanyard. Both women hear, beneath everything, the steady tick of cooling engines. South Bend, May 1945. The factory exhales. Without the belts, the cavern sounds like a church after the hymn. Nora Kinsey walks the line with a clipboard she doesn't need anymore, touching fenders the way a nurse touches beds after visiting hours. A completed US-6 waits with its hood latched and its tires chalked. It will never sail, but 100 like it are already somewhere east under dust or snow. She opens her pocket notebook and finds the number she wrote for luck, 217,143, then presses the page flat as if to iron a wrinkle from time. The foreman's voice carries in the new silence. He reads out totals that feel like fiction, years of throughput counted in the language of thousands, then tens of thousands. Pallets of spares alone, tires, tubes, gaskets, brake linings, stacked skyward, an inventory that would have matched or surpassed a month of the enemy's truck production at the war's end. On the notice board, telegrams live in the same pushpin field as output charts. Nora touches one with a fingertip and thinks of boys who learned to shift by sound and prayer. Outside, the whistle blows a note that means stop, then means victory. Men in oily coveralls stand with their caps in their hands. A union steward says nothing at all and passes a tin of coffee like a sacrament. Nora imagines a road that runs from these doors to a river dock, to a cargo hold, to a sun-sick yard where a fitter wipes his hands and calls a machine Studer. She thinks of how a nation turned machines into consumables and people into the irreplaceable thing. Lights click off in rows. The line sleeps. Somewhere an engine ticks as it cools, counting miles it will never drive and already has. Summer 1946. The picnic table is war's strangest altar. Paper plates, a map, a grease-smudged logbook, and a slide rule nicked like a bayonet. Veterans argue kindly about road gradients and chain sizes while a historian writes without interrupting. The numbers that once felt like rumor now have addresses. Allied shipments of vehicles overseas climbed toward 400,000. Of those, Studebaker US-6 deliveries to the USSR alone would settle near 152,000. In 3 hard months, the Red Ball Express moved more than 400,000 tons. In 1944, German replacement of vehicles fell to about half of losses. The men nod at what they already knew by the ache in their hands. Distance stopped being a weapon the instant America decided it was a schedule. An impossible figure lands like laughter. Over 600,000 quarter-ton 4x4 trucks, Jeeps, built by Willys and Ford, a light vehicle run that by itself would outnumber Germany's entire wartime production of military trucks and lorries. It is not apples to apples, someone says, but it is orchards to a single tree. The point is not category, the point is capacity. The historian underlines a doctrine sentence, treat machines as consumables. And a driver from Detroit mutters that you still change the oil before you change the plan. They pass the logbook. On one page is a cereal that has traveled farther than any of them could have alone. On another, a penciled note, tempo exported. The conversation turns to peacetime roads, to GI Bills and factories that will make refrigerators with the same stubborn exactness. The map on the table shows bridges that are no longer broken. A child runs a toy truck over them, humming an engine's hymn. Beyond the park, America idles in high gear, free, noisy, and ready to move.